Hello, my name is Nicole, and welcome to this episode of the Apostolic Angle Perspectives of a Present Day Pentecostal. I hope everyone has had a great week, and this will be part 3 of my testimony. And I encourage you to listen to the previous episodes first if you haven't already, so that you will have more of an understanding of my journey. And I would like to ask, if you could, to please like and share this and previous episodes and subscribe. I believe this will be my last episode where I'm focusing solely on my story, but I definitely want to give the fuller story of my past instead of just my formative years. I ended last week talking about when I was 7 years into my first marriage, and this is when I had a 6-year-old daughter, a 4-year-old son, and a 2-year-old son, and I had just found out about my ex's infidelity. I mentioned that it was actually worse than just infidelity, but there are aspects that I can't share due to it not being my story alone. I will just say that my ex did victimize someone, but I didn't recognize it for what it was. Well, during this time, my ex was trying to play into my sympathies and to offer a, quote, explanation for his weakness by sharing that he had had an addiction to Porn for years. He swore that he wanted to be a better husband and father, and while we were separated, he would also tell the kids that he wanted to get back together with me, but that I was the one that didn't want to. How do you explain to 3 young, innocent children what happened that could give them some understanding of why mommy was not choosing reconciliation? I looked like the bad guy. My boys weren't as aware of what was going on, of course, but my daughter would ask me why we couldn't get back together. During that time, when they would see their dad, he was turning on the charm, treating them special, taking them to fun places, buying them things, and wasn't acting his usual sullen and angry self. He was selling them the lie that if we got back together, that we could finally be a happy family. I ended up simply telling my daughter that her dad had decided that he loved another lady more, and that was all I could tell her. Well, 2 weeks before I found out about this incident, something had happened that I had confided in a friend about, and she told me that if I ever needed a place to go, to not hesitate to call her. I had confided in her several times in the past about how my ex was treating us, but it had reached a new level of mistreatment and dysfunction at this point. I had gotten the feeling that something was deeply wrong because my ex had threatened divorce when he usually prided himself on not believing in divorce and never using that word. This was after a confrontation that we had had when I questioned him about inconsistencies in our finances, and I had discovered that that was quite the hot topic. He would get irate over me bringing them up, and so I usually avoided dealing with it except in rare cases. Years later, I would have multiple proofs that he was spending money on extracurricular activities, and that is why he always got so angry and defensive. During this particular heated confrontation, after threatening me with divorce, he sought to intimidate me with an even worse threat. He told me not to think that I would be able to have custody of the kids because I didn't have a job outside the home and couldn't afford to take care of them. Mind you, we shared the same desire for me to be a stay-at-home mom, at least during the kids' formative years. Also, I did not have a college education, and I wouldn't have made enough money to have made it worthwhile to put the kids in daycare. I wasn't willing to put them in daycare anyway, and I didn't have any family members close by to help with them either. Well, at this point, I'm not going to address any of the spiritual abuse or irrational responses that I received from spiritual leadership and even friends over the years or specifically during this time, but I will just say here that there was more than one person who tried to lay blame for his unfaithfulness at my feet, insinuating that if he didn't have such a burden for our care, our financial care, that maybe there wouldn't be such a wedge in our relationship, and that he wouldn't have been driven to do what he did. Later on down the road, one particular friend that made this claim refused to even listen to or consider all of the facts that pointed to my ex being not only unfaithful, but a pedophile. When I'd found out about his infraction, I had called these friends that I'd spoken to 2 weeks before and told them we needed to get out. And so they came and got us. However, our leadership did not want anyone from the church taking us in. I had no family that I could go to. I wasn't willing to live with my father as I did not want to put myself or my children in that situation, and I didn't feel any of my siblings could take us in. Also, I didn't want us to have to leave our church and I did not have close family in that area. We stayed with that family for a month, and then another family took us in. I was beginning to find government help, and I knew that I was going to have to get out on my own. I was trying to get my ex to get us an apartment in his name, but our leadership told him that wasn't a good idea, because I may damage it out of spite. Or at least this is what my ex told me, but with future experiences that I would have with this leadership, it definitely rings as true and characteristic of something that he would say. During this time, there was a man in our church who had been unfaithful to his wife years before while he was out of church and drinking a lot. He had been shot 9 times one night outside a bar when he walked into the middle of a gang initiation. He had to go immediately into surgery for all of his insides to be stapled back together, and he was left a quadriplegic. But the positive was that he had given his life back to God, and his relationship with his wife had been restored. I will call this man Rick. Rick had begun reaching out to my ex, truly trying to minister to him, and my ex had shared that I was trying to get him to get an apartment in his name for us, but that our leadership frowned upon that idea. Rick asked him, "Well, do you want your family back?" My ex said yes, and so Rick said, "Well, then don't you think you should show them that you care about their situation?" So that is how my ex got us an apartment, and I was able to finally have a place with the kids. I have questioned myself about this many times ever since, but almost as soon as we had moved into the apartment, I made the decision to reconcile, and my ex moved in. I have stated that I can't share all of the details, but I still didn't realize that he was a pedophile. I have thought that maybe if I hadn't reconciled then, that maybe he couldn't have perpetuated certain abuses down the road. But on the other hand, it may have given him even greater opportunity if we had divorced, and if he had had shared custody of the kids without me knowing the full scale of his lack of character. As I stated previously, he had sworn up and down that he needed another chance to be a better husband and father. Unfortunately, and not surprisingly, his good guy persona didn't last very long after the reconciliation, and he had gone back into his angry and hateful ways. If only I had grasped the fact that when people get caught in whatever their betrayal or transgression is, usually any remorse that they seem to portray excuse me usually any remorse that they seem to portray has to do with the fact that they got caught, not because they are actually remorseful over their behavior. 6 months after we reconciled, he lost a job due to them finding PORN on the work computer. At the time, we didn't have a home computer, but it wasn't long after that until we did, and then that began with me being able to see that he was continuing to access it on our own home computer as well as only God knows where else. Over the next 10 years, this would be a recurring situation, and of course, I always questioned why I wasn't good enough. I had little to no understanding of that issue at that time, but now I realize that when a person has that problem, it has nothing to do with the spouse or the partner of that person. It would not matter how physically perfect or beautiful they might be, but that is all I will say about that, at least for now. I would love to say that the situation 7 years into our marriage would be the last or worst thing he did in the area of sickening betrayal, or his victimization of another innocent party, but it wasn't. However, it would be the situation that would eventually open my eyes to his deep levels of depravity and ultimately cause me to understand that I myself had also been his victim. After almost 17 years of what was not really a marriage, my kids and I finally got out for good. For the most part after that, we would be in a peaceful home environment, except for a short period of 3 months when I had no choice but for us to live with my parents. But other than that, our home situations have been completely different ever since. Other kinds of turmoil, however, were just beginning to brew. The aftermath of not only the abuse that had taken place for so many years and my failing health was only further worsened by all kinds of fallout and aftermath. My ex, being the liar and manipulator that he was, spread all kinds of lies about me, including about my reasons for leaving. I had confided in a few friends about what was going on, but I was told by leadership not to talk to anyone, so I was unable for the most part to get my side out there. At first, he was telling people that we had gone on a trip, but when he realized we weren't returning, he started telling them I had left because of typical marital issues, such as our finances. People were calling me crazy when they heard what he had actually been accused of. They felt so sorry for him that his wife had just abandoned him for nothing. I could spend several episodes talking about the backlash, the rejection, and the absolute refusal of many to even listen to my story. When I left, I had thought I was going to get back on my feet that summer, and that we would then return to the area and back to the church where we had come from. I was emailing my leadership and telling them what was going on, but we were called liars, and everything I said was ignored, and nothing was done to try and investigate the truth. I was encouraged to come home and return us to the environment. I had called authorities about the new revelations I was finding out, and there was an investigation, but there wasn't enough tangible evidence to convict him. They did not doubt that a crime had occurred, and they said it would be on his record, and that if there were to be another accusation, that he would automatically be arrested. A part of the tangible evidence that would have been needed in our case in order for it to go to trial would have been like specific dates, which victims in these cases many times are not able to give. They can't move forward based on an estimated time frame alone. I also believe, based on what I was told by investigators, that the victim wasn't willing to fully divulge all of the facts. Just to clarify, this was 10 years after the initial situation, and this time it was undoubtedly an underage victim. Because of that, since my ex refused to acknowledge what he had done, he managed to convince our leadership that we were lying, and to believe that certainly if he were guilty, then he would have been charged with a crime. There is so much I could say here, but of course the majority of the people believed these lies, and from that point on we lived under a stigma. Only a handful stood by me. For years, my kids would be told by other kids that they knew their father better than they did, and that their dad was a good man and would never do those things. I know they were just repeating what they had heard. On top of all that, my ex's family refused to believe not only my testimony, but also the testimony of my children. They would rake my kids over the coals, and these were adult members of the family, and would tell them that they needed to apologize to their father. They, of course, used sentiments such as saying he was a good man because he was a hard-working man. I have since received an apology from one of these family members. In case there is anyone who hasn't watched the previous episodes, I will share once again that my ex was arrested last year in the state of Pennsylvania for the rape of a 15-year-old, whom he had been grooming since she was 12. Multiple people began coming forward and sharing their stories of victimization, and he was initially charged with multiple felonies. He waived his right to a preliminary hearing so that further charges could not be brought. He then pleaded no contest to one charge, which means that he couldn't be sentenced to any of the further charges. He received 2 to 10 years with 1 year time served, and with good behavior and positive response to treatment, he could possibly be out in as little as a year and a half. He will also have to register as a violent SA offender for the rest of his life. Needless to say, even though our lives have greatly improved, the last 12 years have still not been a walk in the park, with the further trauma, loss of friendships, appearing to have been unsubmissive to leadership, etc. Thankfully, however, we have had an amazing support system the entire time, which has come from different places for each of us, and has spoken out on our behalf as needed. Both of my sons have married incredible girls, and my oldest son and his wife had 2 baby boys back to back, and so I am a grandmother, aka Honey. My husband is an over-the-top pleased and thankful and in-love grandfather, and he is Papa Bear or just Papa Gene. I believe I have previously stated that I have always sought healing in the Lord's presence, but it seemed as if I could only go so far in my recovery. I have always had the intuition that I knew I needed to allow myself to be vulnerable in God's presence, and I know that the healing had already begun taking place. I mentioned that around 10 or so years ago, I had really begun to pray for physical healing, but a lady in my church, Vicki Mitchell, told me that God was going to heal me, but that I also needed a spiritual and emotional healing. Little did I know that there was another lady in another state who God was going to cause my paths to cross with in 2018, and she had faced a dark and similar battle of her own of betrayal and brokenness and desperation. This lady's name is Kathy Corson. The Lord ended up seeing her through her situation, and she had received prophecies of how God was going to use her to minister to and speak into many women's lives in the future. God gave her a vision of a healing and deliverance ministry that he was calling her to start. In this vision, he showed her a woman holding a lamp. This lady, Sister Corson, not only loves the Word of God, but she also loves words in general. She loves acronyms, plays on words, etc. Along with showing her this lady holding a lamp, he also gave her the acronym and name for this future ministry. LAMPS, which stands for Ladies Abused Mentally, Physically, Spiritually, Self, Substance, and SA. In January of 2016, the first LAMPS services took place in Longville, Louisiana. In 2018, one was being held in Texas, and God told a friend of mine to invite me. While there, I had an impression that I would one day be involved, but I thought that was just my own desires. Through somewhat of a slow process, the Lord did confirm that He was calling me into the Lamps ministry, and that all of the callings and giftings in my life would be specifically geared towards women who have experienced great brokenness. He told me that my testimony would not go to waste. I cannot begin to explain how deeply and profoundly the Lamps ministry and Sister Corson have impacted my life. There has been much healing and recovery in my life, including of my body no longer shutting down as it used to. Layer by layer, the Lord has dealt with certain people and circumstances that have so incredibly traumatized my life, and has removed much of the buried hurt and suffering. Many strongholds have been broken, and my identity is being recovered. That first Lamps, I was ministered to by 3 different people, 2 of whom I had never met or seen. Among other things that I was told, Sister Corson told me that God was doing a deep-seated work and was uprooting deeply ingrained hurt and pain from the past. Sister Karen Nichols told me that God was going to restore my honor. That has been happening this last year as my story has been validated and my past is being vindicated. Not only the truths that have been proven because of my ex being arrested and so many other victims coming forward, but also other events that I won't go into that has caused more light to be shed on the fact that I have not been spreading falsehoods, that I was not crazy, and that I was acting out of not only personal survival, but also out of necessity or necessary protection for my children. My health is in the process of being restored. My husband and others are still telling me that they are continuing to see changes in my countenance as I continue to be poured into by Sister Corson and experience the depths of healing that is a part of every Lamps service. It has been beyond a privilege to have grown close to Sister Corson, and she not only has become my mentor, but she is also like my mom. For so long, it felt as if lifelong callings and dreams and giftings were going to waste, and that I was coming to ruin. But the Lord has been revealing to me that none of it has gone to waste, and that it is all going to be turned for mine and my family's good, and God is going to use it for the good of others as well. It has been on my heart for years to have an outlet to share things that the Lord has put on my heart, and that includes a calling to write. I used to think that I was going to start a blog, but I could never get it up and running, and to be honest, I have felt very uncomfortable doing videos, but that's what it's going to be, at least for now. I have taught a Bible study in different venues called Finding Freedom, including on the Lamps private Facebook page, so feel free to ask for more information about that. I've also started to share my story on TikTok, and my TikTok's name is my full name, which is Amber Nicole, and then almost my full last name, but somehow it left off the last letter. So it's just AMBERNICOLEMCKINZ, and that's all lowercases and all lowercase letters, and that's all together, no spaces. I have had the honor of compiling and editing a book of testimonies for the Lamps Ministry entitled From My Story to History, or His Story, Lamps Ministry Testimonies. It can be purchased on Amazon under either the subtitle Lamps Ministry Testimonies or under my full name, Amber Nicole McKenzie, and that last name is spelled MCKINZY. For some reason, it doesn't want to come up under the title, and all proceeds go into the Lamps Ministries. As the Lord has been restoring my health, it has become more and more apparent to me that God desires me to give all of my time and attention to kingdom matters and ministry, and that is truly my heart's desire. Before leaving my ex, I had just completed a little over a year as a music major in college and wasn't able to continue because of becoming a single mom. Then, after I had remarried, I went back, but the second time I entered the paralegal program and again completed a little over a year before I had to quit. My husband had had a major health crisis, and I tried to work for a while to help with some financial issues that it ended up causing. But my health was continuing to fail more and more, and I couldn't handle it anymore. And I'm not going to go into it now, but one of my episodes will be about my husband's testimonies. I'm sorry, it will be about my husband's miracle that happened in 2015. And so anyway, I mean, I've experienced miracles also, but this is one of the greatest miracles that I have ever heard of anyone, and especially that I'm so close to. So, because I had to quit and get a job, during this time I was providing medical transportation, and I wasn't really making any money because of all the expenses having to use my own car. But during that time, I had over 80 people in my car, and I was able to share my testimony and God's love with many. Some of them I was able to teach Bible studies, and I even brought some of them to church. So no matter what is going on in your life, God can use it for His purposes and for your good. So to end this episode, I want to share that Lamps travels to wherever churches or groups give us an invitation. We have several coming up within the next few months, and so if you are close by, we would love to have you join. Right now, they are typically open to ladies only, but sometimes we do have a mixed group, and later we are definitely wanting to have them more often for men. And then the L in the Lamps and the acronym wouldn't stand just for ladies, but it would stand for lives. And so 2 were coming up in Louisiana. We have one in Longville at the end of January. And then the other in Campty, Louisiana, but I don't have even a rough date of that yet. Then in February, we are having one in Live Oak, Florida, and I believe we will also be having one in Navarre, Florida. I have also been invited to come to Florida in December and share my testimony, and I will let y'all know when I have all of the details. And for any comments, feel free to leave them down below, or you can email me at theapostolicangle@yahoo.com. Join me next week for the next episode of The Apostolic Angle, Perspectives of a Present-Day Pentecostal, when I will talk about why what we call ourselves matters or not, and to what degree it matters, and whether you're apostolic or of another belief system, the church as a spiritual entity versus organizations or denominations, etc. And also, are we being divisive when we call ourselves anything other than simply Christians? Remember, the premise of this podcast is why I have chosen to identify myself and follow God as I have, despite a very shaky introduction to it. I am not here to argue, but I do welcome respectful discussion and questions. We will not get very far from bashing anyone or their sincerely held beliefs, and doing that is definitely not anywhere in my agenda. So once again, I ask you to like, share, and subscribe, and God bless you all, and see you next week.